You want to get started?
Let's go.
We can start.
So welcome everybody to the continuation of the Summer Author Series. I am Debbie Hockman from Fort Lauderdale, the David Posnack JCC, and thrilled to be a partner with the Orlando JCC and the Tampa JCC to bring you a Sunday part of our summer series. And I thank Avivit for pulling this together with Lauren Zimmerman from the Writer's Block, and excited to welcome the authors today. Avivit, take it away.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. So excited to see you. I'm Avivit Ehrlichman, Cultural Arts Director here in the Roth Family JCC in Greater Orlando. We're so excited to do it as a partner with Fort Lauderdale, Debbie Hutchman, and Brandy from Tampa. We're very excited to have Kristin with us again, I would say, because we did have her on March and we enjoyed so much. So we decided that we need once again. And thank you so much, Patty Callahan, for actually joining us today. And I'm sure Kristin has a lot to tell about you as well with your books. And we're really excited for today. So thank you so much. And Kristin, the stage is yours.
Great. Well, thank you everyone, to all of you who came today. Thank you, Avivit, for that lovely introduction. And so for all of you who are spending part of your Sunday, this just means so much to us. So I am so thrilled, especially those of you who have met me before, to introduce you to Patty Callahan Henry, who is one of my favorite authors, one of my dearest friends. We do the wonderful Friends in Fiction Wednesday night Facebook chat together, which you can join. I'm sure we'll be telling you about that later in this hour. But Patty is the best-selling, New York Times best-selling author of, what is it, Patty, 15 novels now, I think, including Becoming Mrs. Lewis, which is incredible. It's the story of Joy Davidson, right? That's her last name. Everything's running together. Yeah. Who married C.S. Lewis, and it's basically the story of their lives, and it's just, oh my gosh, it's such an amazingly well-researched book, a book that will just get you right in the heart. And it came out in paperback in March, but not just in paperback, but as an expanded version of the first hardcover edition. So it's fabulous. It's something wonderful to get your hands on. And Patty is just full of wonderful books and wonderful surprises, including the novel that she's finishing up now, which I'm so excited to talk about also. But as we chat, we're probably going to be chatting for about 25 minutes or so. Please do be posting your questions for us, because we would love to take them, love to answer whatever questions you have. So Patty, thank you so much for being here today. Take it away.
I am so thrilled to be here. Debbie, I went to high school in Fort Lauderdale, so my formative teenage years were spent in South Florida. At the present moment, I am sitting in the Pacific Northwest. And although these canceled live events are really hard on all of us, it's astounding that y'all are in Florida and I'm in the Pacific Northwest with my daughter, and yet we're all together, and I'm really thrilled. So I know most of you know Kristin, but for those of you who don't, I'm going to read and tell you a short bio, and we're going to jump into loads of questions as we hear about her astounding new novel, The Book of Lost Names. And I have been a fan of this book since the first sentence. And if you read it, then you know that the first sentence grabs you when the woman sees her book in a library. But Kristin Harmel is the #1 international bestselling and USA Today bestselling author of The Book of Lost Names, The Winemaker's Wife, and a dozen other novels that have been translated into numerous languages. I wanted to count, but I didn't, and sold all over the world. She is a former reporter for People magazine. She grew up in St. Petersburg, Florida, and somehow we missed each other, probably because we're a couple decades apart.
Stop.
And began her writing career at, I want you to guess how old she was when she began her writing career. Nope, you're wrong, 16. Working for a local magazine and covering sports for the St. Petersburg Times. After graduating from the University of Florida, I went to Auburn, so we're big rivals.
Friendship over.
Only in sports are we rivals. Otherwise, we're not rivals at all. And she has lived in both Paris and Los Angeles. Kristin now is settled in Orlando, where she lives with her husband and young son. Over the course of her journalism career, she has interviewed people ranging from Walter Cronkite to Justin Timberlake. We might have to talk about that. To the cast of Harry Potter films. And she was also a frequent contributor to the national television morning show, The Daily Buzz. Her latest novel that we're going to talk about today, The Book of Lost Names, which came out just 5 days ago on Tuesday, has been in a People magazine Best Books of Summer and was just featured in Parade magazine. A lot of y'all probably saw it there. And it features a Florida librarian for you Floridians and as the main character in its present day storyline. So Kristin, I'm so happy you asked me to do this. We know each other so well because we are 2 of the 5 friends who host a weekly Facebook Live show every Wednesday night, along with the New York Times bestsellers Mary Kay Andrews, Mary Alice Monroe, and Christy Woodson Harvey. Not only do we do the weekly show together, but we literally, and I'm not using it the way the teenagers use it, we literally talk to each other every day. And so we have all been on a ride for this book coming out. Not only do we talk, but we support each other, and I'm thrilled. Thank you for asking me to join you, Kristin.
It was really just an excuse to see you on a Sunday, because usually we're just texting back and forth. So this is all just a fancy excuse that like 77 people are in on with us so that you can be here with me. So thanks everyone for coming to me and Patty's little gab session. But no, I'm super honored that you agreed to do this, Patty, because I know you're on vacation with your family and it just was extra meaningful. And, you know, I keep saying to people that you truly are one of the best things for me to have come out of this whole pandemic experience. We wouldn't know each other like we do now without that. So I just feel really lucky to have your friendship and your support. So thank you very much. And I hope everyone will look you up tonight or today too. So tonight, that's how far ahead of myself I am. I said, I hope everyone will look you up tonight. It's 1 o'clock and I'm already like hours ahead of
like a 5-hour Zoom? This is what, a 5-hour event? 5 or 6?
5 hour, I hope you're all settled in for the long run. Yeah, exactly. So I can't wait to hear I have everyone hear about you talk about becoming Mrs. Lewis a little bit later, but should I maybe begin by telling us a little bit about the Book of Lost Names?
So what I want you to do is I want you to pretend. So for all you who are watching, that one of the things that authors dread the most is when somebody says, give us an elevator pitch about your book. So I want to get us started, but before we do that, I want to say, because I've already seen a question about this pop up on our Q&A, the place you can get signed the Book of Lost Names is at the Writer's Block in Orlando. And it is sold out almost everywhere, but not permanently. There has been a huge rush on the book, which I knew would happen. And so it's sold out a lot of places, but it is not sold out at Writer's Block. And I think Kristin will put a link in the Q&A later, but tell us a little bit about it, please, please, please.
Well, it's unfortunately, you know, I need to actually get on an elevator one day and just talk through this talk, because I'm really not sure how many floors we're going up as I say this, but
let's pretend it's the tallest building in the world.
Okay, fantastic.
No. Or something. Okay.
So the Book of Lost Names is the story of a female forger in World War II who stumbles into the French Resistance, mostly by accident, and she winds up helping save the lives of hundreds of children. So she and her mother are fleeing the Nazis themselves after the arrest of her father, who was a Polish-born Jew, and they wind up in a small French mountain town in the unoccupied zone, where a priest who's working for the local resistance network finds out about her falsified documents, approaches her, and offers her help in saving her father in exchange for her helping him with some forgeries. So she agrees, at first, mostly because she's thinking, how else am I going to get my father out of, you know, where he is? But soon she meets Remy, who is another forger within the network, and who at the beginning is a little bit suspicious of how she's going to work with him. He kind of has it all under control and he can't believe she'd bring anything new to the table. But of course she does. So they're both passionate, not just about saving the children who they're falsifying documents for, and it is primarily children they're working with, but also about preserving their real identities, especially those who are too young to remember who they really are once their names are changed. So they decide to encode those identities in a 1732 religious text, just a random basic thing that would not stand out in a church library at all. And they're working in a church library. So they encode these names in this religious text, which they begin referring to as the Book of Lost Names, hence the title. But toward the end of the war, after their resistance cell is blown and Remy disappears, the book goes missing too, possibly looted by the Nazis as they pull out of France. And 60 years later, as Patty mentioned, Ava is a librarian working in Florida, and she happens to glimpse the book in an article in the New York Times about Nazi looted books and the search to return them to their rightful owners. So as we see her story unfolding in the past between 1942 and 1944, we also see her in the present trying to summon the courage to travel to Berlin to finally see if the Book of Lost Names holds the last secrets that she's been after for the last 6 decades. So like moderately long elevator ride, like floor 40 we get to.
But you know what? It never gets old hearing that. Like I thought, well, I'm going to check the Q&A. And then I was like, oh, all right. I was in rapture.
Oh.
So somebody in the Q&A wrote no spoilers because there's so many to be read piles. We promise no spoilers.
No spoilers. No.
We're just going to, and I also noticed that the JCC put the bookstore link in the chat if y'all are looking for it. So
and I do have to say all the copies they have there are signed. I sat down and signed copies the other day until my hand practically fell off. So if you order a copy from them, you will definitely get an autographed copy.
So I know this is your 5th World War II novel.
Yeah.
And I also know that it is a transition from your other novels. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, because we've both done it, transition from more contemporary to research to historical novels that require an immense amount of research.
Yeah.
And it's a scary transition when you're safe in a certain genre. It's hard it's risk taking, especially because the research is so intense. It's not something you can do quickly. So not only do I want you to talk to us a little bit about what made you make that transition, but what sparked your interest in writing about this time period at all.
Well, those are such great questions. And, I know we had talked the other day about transitions in writing. And when you said that, I was thinking more of the transition I made between 2010 and 2012, when I went from writing like completely contemporary stories that were romantic comedies to writing my first book about, that took place during World War II. And that was probably for me the biggest transition. I mean, to go from basically writing books that were like Sex and the City or Bridget Jones's Diary to writing something much deeper. And that was honestly just kind of a reinvention of myself. I wrote that book right around the time I turned 30. And I think that's a big time of transition. That was 11 years ago. But I think that's a big time of transition in your life in general, where you're just kind of trying to figure out who you are and where you belong. As for my interest in World War II specifically, I've always been interested in stories about the Holocaust. I was deeply moved by the Diary of Anne Frank when I was a young teenager. And it's the book that not only has stayed with me all these years, above all other books I read when I was a young person, but it's also the book that made me know I wanted to be a writer, because I think prior to that, I always thought that telling entertaining stories and changing people's lives a little bit in a positive way were two completely mutually exclusive things. I didn't think you could change the world through words. And that was the first time reading her diary that I understood the impact that the right words could have and the right story could have. And I think that stayed with me, not just her story, but that lesson. And in fact, all of my novels have had a minor character named after her. So every single one of my novels has had some version of Anne, dating all the way back to when I was writing my first novel, How to Sleep with a Movie Star, which was not a real how-to guide, I promise. And then I think the second thing, and I'm actually glad you asked this question toward the top of this conversation today, because the other thing that I think made me really want to write about World War II was a conversation I had with someone who I know has been really influential in the Roth family Orlando JCC, a man named Henry Landworth, who was the founder of Give Kids the World. Some of you out there may know him, or at least know of him. He spent so I interviewed him for People Magazine, for a People Magazine article several years ago, in the capacity of him being the founder of Give Kids the World, which is a charity that gives terminally ill children and their families a dream vacation in the Orlando area. They have a Give Kids the World village. It's incredible. His two best friends were Walter Cronkite and John Glenn, both of whom said he was one of the most extraordinary people they'd ever met, which that's saying something coming from Walter Cronkite and John Glenn. He was an Auschwitz survivor. He was in concentration camps from age 13 to age 18. And one of the things he said that stuck with me all these years later, and became part of my first World War II novel, The Sweetness of Forgetting, was that in order to survive in the concentration camps, he had to turn his feelings off. And when the war was over, he didn't know how to turn them back on again. That really hit home with me and became sort of part of the psychological exploration of that novel. And once I wrote that novel, I couldn't stop. And every novel has come from the World War II one I have researched prior to it. And I think everyone has involved more and more research, because I keep falling more and more down that research hole of, why are these things happening and what details can I give? And the more I dig, the more interesting information I find that I can share with readers. And I feel like with books like this, the realer the world is, or the more real the world is, the more you can become involved in the characters' stories, because the setting just kind of falls into place.
Right.
So I know we were going to talk about the Book of Lost Names, and I know you told me ahead of time, like, no, just focus on you. But I do want to talk a little bit about Becoming Mrs. Lewis and the research you did for that, because I think it's really fascinating. And especially if people showed up today to hear me talk, and they're going to have the opportunity to hear about that book of yours too, I would really love them to, because it's a book I really think everyone should read. And it's available in paperback now, which is fantastic.
Well, it's going to be super quick then, because you trapped me. But the Becoming Mrs. Lewis is a novel about an extraordinary woman named Joy Davidman, who was a Jewish woman raised in New York, who was married with 2 kids and ended up becoming the wife of C.S. Lewis. I mean, there's no more improbable pairing than these 2 people. And I read this quote she wrote that said, "If we should ever grow brave, what on earth would become of us?" And I just had to tell her story. And I feel like that's a lot of what these characters in your books, and I know the book you're working on, Kristin, is the same thing. What if we were brave? If we were brave enough to forge? What if we were brave enough to change our lives? What if we were brave enough to try to save other people at the risk of ourselves? And so I think we wrote these books for some of the same reasons, but that's to see what happens when people tap into the courage and bravery, even though they're scared. And that's one of the things I love about your books. It was one of the questions I had about this theme of salvation, of redemption and saving and bravery and courage, while you're also scared. Which there's a question that just popped up that said, have you ever read Night by
Yes.
Yes. They said that's a powerful novel too. So.
Yeah, it's a powerful book. Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to know, nope, no more about me. I want to know why you keep returning to France, because with this is what, the 4th book set in France or the 5th?
Yeah, well, the 4th World War II book set in France, but I did also write, back when I was writing the contemporary, like really light novels, one of those books was set in Paris too. But actually it was interesting because I set that book in Paris and then knew I had a deeper reason to come back. And so The Sweetness of Forgetting was also Paris. And yeah, this is my 4th set in France. I lived in Paris myself when I was in my 20s, my early 20s. And it was the summer I really found myself. Oh, by the way, I should just pause and say, like, good deflection, Patty, like way to shift back into mine. That was expertly done. Thank you. But yeah, so I lived in Paris in my early 20s. It was a very formative time of my life. It's when I started writing my first novel. And not just when I started writing my first novel, but when I gave myself permission to dream that dream. Because before that, I had been writing, I'd been writing for People magazine. I wrote for a lot of other magazines, and I continued writing for People magazine for a decade after that, while simultaneously writing novels. So I didn't stop doing the journalism. But I took a big step back in the journalism. I think prior to that, I was on this kind of fast track. I was working probably 70 hours a week. I mean, just basically, I mean, it was insane. I didn't have a family yet. I was just kind of, working all the time to just keep climbing higher and higher. And it was like stepping out of that rat race, or stepping off that ladder to the top when I moved to live in Paris. And I realized that when I slowed down, I could ask myself the questions of, who do I want to be? Where do I want to be? And who I wanted to be was a person who wrote novels. And that was the time to try. And it obviously that changed my life.
Amazing.
So it's interesting. I was inspired by living in Paris. I really fell in love with Paris and with France. But it wasn't until much later that I realized my father's grandmother on his mother's side had actually been a Parisian woman. She was French, so I'm French on that side of the family, which I had not known. I mean, I had known there was some French heritage, but she had been a World War I war bride. And her apartment in Paris, when she was a young woman living in Paris, had been just a couple blocks from my apartment in Paris when I was living in Paris. So it just always it felt like, even though I never knew it, it was sort of the story I was drawn to write. And of course, when you write about France, you get to keep going back to France. So I mean, I kind of have the system figured out now. And my last my last book, The Winemaker's Wife, took place in the Champagne region of France. And hey, it turns out when you write a book about Champagne, you actually get to go to Champagne and you get to drink all the champagne. So it's really just I want to keep going back to France. No, I love France, and I love its people, and I love the stories of the resistance that come from there.
When I finished Becoming Mrs. Lewis after my trip to Oxford and to London, I was like, I'm going to find another story to write here. 90% because I want to go back, right? But there is something interesting what you were saying when you found out a relative was Parisian. So all the new studies, even in the Holocaust, show this epigenetics where there's this kind of ancestral memory in our DNA. It's proven. And so there's this ancestral, I think we can go certain places or hear certain things. And it's not a memory in a visual way, but a memory kind of in a visceral way. Like, I am drawn to this. I am drawn to this place.
Yes.
So, or the trauma, even like the trauma of the Holocaust.
Well, Patty, actually, can I interrupt and say it's so interesting that you say that, because I think that's part of my journey too. And I'm not sure you know this about me. I don't know if I've ever said this to you, because why would it have come up? But so my dad grew up my dad's dad was agnostic. And so my dad was really raised without any sense of religion. And so when he married my mom, who was Irish Catholic, I was raised Catholic, and that's what's that?
That's a pair.
Yeah, exactly. But so I was raised Catholic, and I'm still Catholic, and I mean that's what I am. But when I was 20 and doing an internship in New York for the summer, I met my dad's cousin Courtney, who is still like, we just connected like that this summer, and like the two of us are inseparable family members now. Like, what a wonderful thing to have come out of that summer. But the first time I went to her apartment, she had a wall full of books about Judaism, and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. What's your interest in that?" And she was like, "Well, because we're Jewish." And I was like, "What?" It had just never come up, because my parents divorced when I was about 11. So in like those years that I would have asked those questions about like, where did you come from and what was your family history, we weren't having those kind of conversations. So it wasn't until I was 20 that I realized my whole dad's side of the family was Jewish, which sounds like an insane thing to discover. But my interest in that existed far before I knew that. So like, I wonder, I mean, maybe it's what you were talking about how it's been in my blood all along. And so that kind of started me on this path to discovery, to realize that, I think when you really nail it down, it's like 3/8 of me is Jewish. But that actually became a part of The Sweetness of Forgetting, my 2012 novel, which is the main character in that novel discovers that her grandmother, who she's always thought was Catholic, is actually Jewish. And it becomes this question of, when you discover that about your family, how does that change who you are? And it just opened this box of questions for me that I've never stopped asking. And I'm so happy that it's something I get to explore in my writing.
We are our ancestors. I mean, it's also a very Judaic concept. Our ancestors are in us, and we are our ancestors. And the things we do now impact our descendants, right? So we're all tied together. And I think our memories in there. Anyway, I got off track. So I want you to tell me a little bit more too about, this is actually a hugely popular genre right now. Even on our Friends and Facebook page, people are constantly asking, I just finished this World War II novel.
Yeah, it is.
What is the next World War II novel I should read? What do you suggest besides the Book of Lost Names, because the whole world is reading it? So what do you think is the draw to World War II and the Holocaust at this present time? I think it maybe started right about when All the Light We Cannot See came out. That was kind of the tipping point, I think. I mean, that's not a study I've done. That's just a guess on my part, but yeah.
No, I think that was a big book that kind of drove that momentum. I think The Nightingale that Kristin Hanna wrote was a very big part of that. And I think Sarah's Key, which sold a little well, I think, but also I think captured a lot of heart. So I think those books were, and I'm sure I'm probably forgetting something. The Book Thief, which was a young adult novel, but I think a lot of adults read it too. That was awesome. It's a good question, and I will answer it. But let me say I'm looking at the clock, and we're at about almost 1:30, and I do want to leave time for questions, and I also want to leave time for you to quickly mention your next book. So we're going to do that in a second. So I will make this the last question of yours. I'm answering, young lady. But I think that
I have more.
too bad. Shut it. Too bad. It's someone else's turn. No, I'm just kidding. So why World War II resonates so much right now? So I think there are a few reasons. I think that for a lot of us who are readers now, we have either parents or grandparents, or maybe even great grandparents, or maybe even in some cases ourselves who lived through that time period or were impacted by that time period. And we are losing that generation. The people who were very young in World War II are in their 90s or maybe late 80s now, who were young enough to have lived through it and remembered it. And I think, for me, certainly writing my first World War II novel a decade ago, The Sweetness of Forgetting, was a way to reconnect with my grandparents' stories, the stories that I didn't have the maturity or the wisdom to ask them to tell me when there was still that chance. And so I miss them every day, and writing about this time period that shaped them, I think has been really influential and helpful for me. And I think it helps a lot of people connect with that generation. I also think that in World War II stories, there's a defined set of, or a defined idea of good versus evil that's going to be at the center of every story. And that doesn't mean that it always has to be, it's just about the good guys versus the bad guys. Because in any good story, there's a lot of gray area in between, right? But to me, it's the same thing as like a comic book universe, a superhero story. You know who you're rooting for from the beginning. And that makes the world a little bit easier to sort of fall into and disappear into. I also think there are a lot of World War II lessons that resonate today, which is why it's so frightening that that some people are forgetting or not understanding that past happened the way that it did. And I also think particularly now in this summer of COVID, when we're socially distancing and life is weird and we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, obviously you can't really compare it to World War II. That was a much, 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 much darker time for so many reasons. But this is a time of darkness in our modern history, a time of confusion, a time of being unsettled. And I think there's some comfort to be found in a book that explores another period in our recent history where people found themselves in the darkness and found that the light had existed all along within them to light that darkness. So I think that's one reason why people are being drawn to these books. Okay, but before we open it up to questions, Patty, you have to tell me about your book that's coming out soon. And don't ask me about mine because I'm only halfway into writing it. I can't really answer it yet, but okay. I do want to hear about yours.
Okay, but I will, I promise. But what you just said was really powerful. I have tears in my eyes, but the other thing is that like in this, I'm serious, you're making me cry. And look, another watcher just said, this is very important what Kristin is saying. And I appreciate what she's doing with her books and educating others.
Thank you.
Anyway, I think it's important because I think that during this time, which of course cannot be compared to World War II as far as the devastation of humankind, but the darkness and the uncertainty. Yeah. Nobody knows what's next.
No, you're right.
And it's so hard to live in uncertainty. I'm here with my 21-month-old granddaughter, and it's really hard to know how the world is going to unfold. And to know, when you read a story like yours, to know that people can reach for their better angels instead of the darkness, that they can be part of the goodness instead of part
of goodness. That's darkness. So true.
But before I answer anything about my book, I want you to pull out the Book of Lost Names that you did for your research, because it's really cool.
So thank you for asking that. Sorry to make you cry. I'm like
Debbie,
I'm like Debbie Downer everywhere I go. Like, let me see if I can get through this Zoom without making you cry. So the Book of Lost Names, that is a great question. So this is the novel, and you can see the cover designers imagining of what the Book of Lost Names would have looked like. I actually have the real book of lost names. How cool is that? And look at the spine of this book and the spine of that book. They're so similar. So the book of lost names isn't real. So the at the center of the novel, that's a fictionalization. The idea that that there was a code inside the book that kept track of these escaped children whose names had been changed. But every time I talked about the book within the book, this is the book I was using. It's a real 1732 religious text. It would have been just a nondescript book on a shelf in a French, little Catholic library in a tiny French town. It's exactly the book I described. And when I used the code, which was based on the Fibonacci sequence, which is a real mathematical code, I was turning to the real pages. So if I would say on page 49, she put a star over the P in Philippe and a dot over the D in de, I was doing it on this page 49 where there's a Philippe and a de. Like I was doing it in this as we went, so that everything exactly matched up. And so I had this that made me feel that beautiful connection to the past and that beautiful sense of possibility, like that, that this, I don't know, it just made it all feel real to me. So it was so cool when she nailed the cover, and I thought, oh my gosh, like it's just magical. It all kind of lines up. And you know what, I do want you to tell us about your next book real quick, but I do want to I know we've mentioned Friends in Fiction a couple times. We've told you who the other authors are, but if you want to join us, if you love books, it's a great place to be, because our group is almost 14,000 members strong now. You just search for us on Facebook. You just search for Friends in Fiction and we will pop up, the group that has about 14,000 members. That's us. You will see Patty and I's smiling faces on the little graphic on the top once you click through, so you'll know you're in the right place. We're live every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. We have author guests who we interview. We talk to each other. We just talk about books and writing and publishing and life. And it's just a good way to spend a Wednesday evening. And then you can spend the week talking to our other readers on the page who just love to talk about books. So if you love books, we hope you'll join us there. But Patty, tell us about your next novel. I'm so excited about it.
Well, it's really funny, as you know, that when you're writing a book, sometimes you're just driven to write a book, and you, like you just said, you just showed the spines of the two books, and then these weird, crazy, synchronistic things happen. And I decided 3 years ago to write this book. It is based on the sinking of a luxury steamship in 1838 with all the to-dos of Savannah and Charleston on it. And I was about 3 weeks into writing the book when they found the ship. They found it at the bottom.
Amazing.
It's amazing. But also, how was I to know that I was writing a book about the themes of survival, how to thrive and not just live through trauma and tragedy, how to thrive afterwards. It's about the themes of courage. It's about the themes of what we do to save our own lives and then save the others of those around us, and how to live through despair and unknowing and uncertainty, and how to live through when you've lost everything. And so it ended up being so apt for today. It's called Surviving Savannah, and it doesn't come out until March of 2021. But I will be on our Friends in Fiction page and on our websites. I'll be sneaking out sneak peeks and all that kind of stuff. The cover, I finally got the cover this week, so we're gonna announce that soon. But it's a really fascinating story, and it has a modern day timeline of a museum curator bringing up the artifacts from this ship. So I have a couple great questions on here this is from Anissa Joy Armstrong. And if y'all have questions, hi Anissa. She is our friend in Friends in Fiction. And so if you have questions, just start rolling them in. Anissa said, and then you guys just stop me when my time is up, because I can talk to Kristin for hours. And for both authors, what is your dream book to write?
Can I say the Anissa Joy Armstrong story? We'll just say
yeah.
It's all about Anissa, which would be a fabulous book, I think. Oh gosh, dream book. I have always wanted to write something set. I've circled around concentration camps in my writing so many times. I've always wanted to write one set in a concentration camp. And I think I'm terrified because of both the emotional impact it would have on me while writing it, but more so the need to get it exactly
Right.
Right. So in the Book of Lost Names, the town that they're in is a fictional town that's based very much so on a couple of real towns. I mean, and every T is crossed and I is dotted, and like the research is all there. But I needed that freedom to be able to write this kind of fictional town. I wouldn't do that if I were writing a book that mostly was set in a concentration camp. And I think I would feel such an obligation to the victims and survivors to get it all exactly right, that the thought still really scares me. So it's something I would like to have the courage to do, and then the time to dedicate to it. Because I think it would take a lot of time, both in the research and in just like the mental just energy it would need to write something that powerful. So yeah.
Well, when we dive that deep in our imagination, we live with it. We end up dreaming about it. We end up thinking about it. So, but they say, I don't know if it's true, but they say that the story that terrifies us the most is the one we're supposed to write.
And so maybe I will. Maybe I am. Yeah, Anissa, I'll have to dedicate it to you if my next novel is that, because you made me confront my deepest fears today. Patty, what about you?
I think my dream novel to write isn't so much terrifying as I just haven't found this. Actually, Mrs. Lewis was my dream novel to write, so I'm thrilled I did it. But I think my dream novel to write, I want to find a really mystical, fascinating story set in Ireland.
Can we write that together? Oh my gosh, because that's my background on my mom's side, and I've always wanted to write an Irish novel too. Patty, let's go to Ireland together and write our Irish novel.
Deal. I've taken a couple trips to Ireland, a couple hikes through Ireland. I'm really into Irish poetry. So I'm always on the lookout. I'm a Callahan. I'm always on the lookout for that. Nancy Battister, who I probably just slaughtered your name, Nancy, and I apologize, asked, did I read that your book, Kristin, was based on a real story?
So it's based on the real stories of forgers in World War II. So the forgery aspect of it is based on a lot of forgers, but the two primary ones I used in my research were a man named Oscar Rosowski, who was a forger who operated in the unoccupied zone in a little area they called the Plateau, which was a very unstrategic area that the Nazis weren't really in any kind of heavy way, which made it the perfect area to keep and funnel children through. So he, much like Ava in the novel, was very instrumental in changing the identities of a lot of children. And then another forger who the story is kind of loosely based on his forgery techniques and his journey was a forger named Adolfo Kaminsky, who was very prominent in the French Resistance in Paris. And he forged, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but it was an astonishing number of documents. He ran a large forgery lab that many of the innovations had just come from his own head. And some of the things specifically in the novel that come from his lab include, for example, he was the one to discover that you could use lactic acid to erase the ink that was most often found on forged or on real documents. So before they were doing forgeries, they were erasing a lot of real documents and then just filling in different details. And the ink that was used was Waterman's blue ink, which was very hard to erase, which is why they used it. Well, he knew from his days of working as a chemist for a dairy farmer that the only thing that could erase the main chemical component in Waterman's blue ink was lactic acid from milk and cream. And he knew that from working for a dairy farmer, because that's the way they used to test the cream that came in to make sure that farmers hadn't watered it down. So they would put like the blue ink, whatever that compound was, into the cream and see how quickly it dissolved it. But that was just one example of a component of his story that became part of Ava's story in the Book of Lost Names. So there were a lot, so much of the story was based on the real stories of the forgers and the forgery networks that helped those children get out.
That's amazing. I didn't know that. I actually didn't know that. So Ron says, you two are amazing. Thank you, Ron.
Is it our Ron? Is it Ron Block?
I don't know. What other Ron would tell us we're amazing? I'm guessing it's our Ron. And he wants to know how we stay motivated during the pandemic. And I'll just answer super quick. I think, I mean, not to beat Friends in Fiction horse to death, but it really has been a motivating force for me, because there's an accountability, there's a place to be. And the second thing we've been doing as a group of 5 authors are these things called morning check-ins and morning sprints. And sometimes we don't get the sprint done, and we're not talking exercise, we're talking writing.
No.
I'm not talking exercise. But the accountability of every day checking in. What did you do on your writing? Did you complete your goal? What do you think we should talk about this week? It's been a touchstone and a thing to return to. And I think the people that I see staying the most motivated is having kind of these little bite-sized goals that keep you focused on the right now instead of the like flash forwarding to the future and becoming overwhelmed. What about you?
Well, I would say those morning sprints that the 5 of us do together have kept me so inspired and so motivated and feeling like I'm accountable to people. I mean, because I think in the midst of this, you just kind of feel a little adrift. I mean, and I think particularly doing what we do, where you don't have to check in with somebody every day, it's easy to just say like, well, I feel like I'm just writing into the universe, and who knows if there's anyone out there who even cares. And so doing these sprints together in the morning, which is basically where we all sit down at the computer at the same time and we all say, usually Mary Kay Andrews says go, and we all begin to write, has kept me putting words on the page every day, except this last week when I was melting down every morning while you guys were sprinting. I was having an emotion
with a 2-year-old. I don't. Yeah.
Well, that's true. That's true. But the other thing, and again, you mentioned friends and fiction. I think, the thing I miss most about touring, and I would imagine you probably agree, is just the interaction you have with readers and bookstore owners, who are really the people. I mean, these are the people you're writing for, and I think it's helpful as a writer to kind of check in with those people, once a year, once every year and a half, however often you're touring, and remind yourself, this is who I'm writing for, and kind of get their feedback and all that. But so I've missed that, but I think friends and fiction for me has been that and more, because like we said earlier, we have almost 14,000 people there, and even if I'm not always as good about responding to comments on the page as I should be, I read them every day. I see what other people are talking about, and it's not quite the same as having a conversation in person, but we're still part of the conversation, and I love hearing what other readers are thinking. So that's kind of kept me motivated and connected too.
Yeah. Okay, Susan Seiselman says, I just read the book of Negroes, and in revolutionary times, wow, this is fascinating. It was the book that listed the Black loyalists that helped the British and were sent to Canada. Had you heard of that?
No.
Oh my gosh, the book of Negroes. That's so fascinating. There's a book idea. Wow. Thank you, Susie. Okay. Judy and Bert Whiteman said, I don't know if Judy's writing to us or Bert. I'm going to give a guess that it's Judy. I don't do Facebook, but I'm glad to see you 2 together. I belong to 2 book clubs, one reading Jewish themed books from my local library. I read Becoming Mrs. Lewis for the library book club, and The Room on Rua Amelie, which is your book, Kristin, for the Temple book club. And here the 2 of you are. That's awesome.
That is so, and you know what? We should also say that if you're not on Facebook, you can find our past episodes on just friendsandfiction.com. So you can still watch the episodes even if you're not on Facebook. But that's such a cool thing to hear. What a small world, right?
Awesome. Thank you, Judy. Ron just answered and said, yes, it is, Miss. It is. So when we say our Ron, we don't share a husband. We have our Ron is he runs the Cuyahoga Public Library in Cleveland, and he is an extraordinary librarian and a really dear friend. So a woman named Gail has asked, who is your favorite author and what is your favorite book?
Patty Callahan Henry, and Becoming Mrs. Lewis. No, I am not kidding when I say that Patty is truly one of my favorite authors. She really is, and I think one of the most beautiful things about doing this Friends in Fiction is that the people who are coming in through each of us get to discover the others. And I'm such a big admirer of Patty, of Mary Alice Monroe, of Christy Woodson Harvey, and of Mary Kay Andrews. So part of the joy has been sharing those authors with my existing readers, and it just kind of broadens all of our worlds. But aside from that, honestly, it's kind of the answer I had before. Anne Frank, I know she just wrote her diary and that one book, but I mean, gosh, what a mark that book made on the world. I mean, she lives on forever in my heart. How about you, Patty?
You know, it's I always say that when I do an event, I'm going to have a sneak sheet on my phone and then I forget to do it. But I'm such a wide reader, you know, everything from nonfiction to fiction. You know, right now the book I'm really into is nonfiction. And then right now I'm finishing, we have Fiona Davis on our show on Wednesday night, and I'm reading her book, The Lions of Fifth Avenue. And I can tell it's amazing because I'm thinking about it during the day and wondering where that stolen book went. So it's set in the New York Public Library for all of you book dorks. But I have so many favorite authors, everything from historical fiction to contemporary fiction to nonfiction, that it's really hard for me to just say, oh, these are my favorites. It's really easy for me to say what I'm reading right now, which is probably a better answer anyway. Anonymous attendee said, the need and importance of continuing education about the Holocaust is underscored by current headlines this weekend of people wearing face masks with swastikas and sports figures making anti-Semitic comments without very much outrage. Thank you, Kristin, for continuing our education.
Thanks for saying that. I mean, it's an important conversation to keep having. And I think, I mean, that just makes me nauseous. That's horrifying. But, you know, I think so much of it comes from ignorance. And I think that, you know, the only antidote to that is education. And I don't mean education in like a beat you over the head way with it, but like this, you know, books are a way to educate too. I mean, and I know that to all of you, I'm obviously preaching to the choir, so to speak, but it is so important to keep drawing people, giving people a reason to come to those stories for, you know, on an emotional level, and then they leave with information and things in their heart that they'll always remember, hopefully, you know. But thank you.
Okay, so y'all from JCC, you're gonna have to stop us because I'm just gonna keep asking the questions here. So you just dive in and stop us when we're done, or Kristin, you tell me. I'm gonna read the last few here. Holly says, thank you for the webinar. I loved the Book of Lost Names.
Thank you, Holly.
And Susie Seiselman says, and if it's Sisselman, I'm sorry, Susie. We love that you're here. She said the Book of Negroes is also called Someone Knows My Name.
Oh, okay.
I have a feeling we'll all be Googling that when we're
For sure. It sounds amazing. Yeah.
But she also wants to know, Kristin, which one of your books did you enjoy writing the most?
That's a great question. I think the Book of Lost Names would probably be the first obvious answer from a writing standpoint, because it was the first time I felt like I'd really hit my stride as a writer in a different way than I had before. I could feel the leap forward in this book. And that sounds like a weird thing to say, but
no, I get it.
It felt different to me in a way somehow. So for the actual writing, this one was probably my favorite. For the research, it would either be The Sweetness of Forgetting, because one of the central plot points is a woman who owns a bakery in Cape Cod, and she discovers that her bakery basically ties into her grandmother's past, which includes her grandmother had grown up in a bakery, and it includes Jewish, Muslim, and Christian bakeries all over Paris. And so the research for that involved basically eating a whole lot of pastries all over Paris, which was amazing. And then for The Winemaker's Wife, as I mentioned, the research included, you know, spending time in a ton of champagne caves, spending time with winemakers, which that whole world fascinates me, and then just drinking a whole lot of champagne because research. So how about you, Patty? Do you have a quick answer for which one of your books you've enjoyed writing the most?
I think it's a tie between Mrs. Lewis and the new Shipwreck book. They were both the hardest books. I can see them coming in to tell us to stop. They were both my harder books to write, but the research was so outrageously fascinating that it never felt surgery. So y'all are amazing. Thank you.
So great. Patty, I can't even thank you enough for joining me today. What a treat just to be here with you.
Sunday afternoon. Yeah.
I know, but gosh, you took an hour away from your grandchild on the last day that you're visiting your sweet little granddaughter. I'm really
Sometimes
sorry.
we need a break from a 2-year-old. Just sometimes. And if we didn't get to your question, we're sorry. I think we missed a couple, but maybe try and shoot us some questions over on Facebook and Friends, and I think Kristin will answer them for you.
Yeah. And
Thank you so much. Kristin and Patty, thank you so much for your time. We really enjoyed listening to you and learning a lot about the books and the book currently that the Book of Lost Names. So thank you so much. Everyone, just so you know that if you would like to purchase a book, you can find it in the chat. There is a link for that, and you can find both books on the Writer Blog bookstore. And you also can find on the chat the link to the YouTube, where you can find the recorded conversation if someone missed some of it or all of it. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for
And
having
have a
us.
wonderful day.
Thanks everyone for coming, and thank you, Avavit, for having us. This was so much fun.
Thank
Thanks
you.
everyone out there. Thank
so
you.
much.